All right, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of SuperFreq. How are you all doing? I am your host, Talíyah. This is all about frequency first living. This podcast exists to explore one central question, and it has evolved like I have over the years. And many of you have been with me since before SuperFreq existed. God bless you. But where we're headed and where I'm headed, and as I continue to evolve and become more embodied and coherent in real time, very messily, if you will, we are studying and researching and identifying what organizes human experience. And I'm doing my best to draw from neuroscience, psychology, systems theory, philosophy, physics, and of course, faith. And as I'm able to build the show I really want to build, and as SuperFreq gets more attention, if you're new, welcome. Each episode explores how perception, prediction, identity, biology, and relationships shape the way that we think, we behave, and ultimately who we want to become, and what creates the conditions for lasting change. So if you are into decoding patterns and you want to live a more coherent life, you are absolutely in the right place. And today I want to talk about and unpack the pattern loop of where we get stuck. And as a little kind of gift to you, I made about a 35-page workbook, a sharp pattern diagnostic workbook that you can use on any behavior. If you're really interested in behavioral change, or you find an area in your life that you continually feel isn't working for you, whether or not that's relationships or money or purpose or career or stagnation with your body or your inability to make like really big swings, you just get really afraid to take big leaps. And I'm in one of those spaces personally right now. I'm being asked to really stretch and stretch my container, stretch and lean into faith and like take up more space in my life. And I have never been modeled that anywhere, right? So I'm having to create that container. And how do we create more space when we've never been shown? And I'm learning everything that, I'm teaching, everything that I'm learning about microdosing, capacity building practices and moving through the pattern loop, which is what I'm going to talk about in today's podcast episode. So if you're, for the sake of this episode, okay, we're going to answer, what is the pattern loop? What is organizing human behavior besides the structure that I talked about in a previous podcast, which is prediction, perception, conditions, constraints, boundaries, and permissions? Okay, that's kind of like how reality is organized. Think about that like a video game. Okay, we're going to apply that to our life and specifically work on the behavior loop, because there's a lot of people who have pop psychology lore literacy, but we're not going to be able to move into behavioral change unless we have relationship. So if you've been very surprised by a recent trigger lately, like you cannot believe that you just behaved a certain way in an area that you think you've been working on for a really, really long time, it's likely because you have a lot of knowledge about it. And however, you haven't had enough relational experience to give the nervous system a new prediction. So I'm going to give you kind of this 6-process pattern loop just to think about, okay? And you can write this down, you could take notes, but I'll give you the link for the pattern workbook, the pattern diagnostic workbook in the notes, and it'll be on all my platforms, and you can comment, whatever, and enter into all of the dick funnels that you want to get all the things. And guys, if you want to be on my newsletter, sign up for the newsletter, get the free stuff, but just know that I'm going to be sending you stuff, okay? I'm going to send you emails. Those are sales elicitations in addition to just letting you know what's going on in the world of SuperFreq and what we're up to and upcoming events and upcoming things. So if you're not interested in behavioral change, okay, if you're really not interested in this work, don't sign up. If you are interested, God bless you. It'll just save all of our time. Just a little disclaimer. So as a side note, yes, the pressure in the collective is increasing. So if you have felt totally crashed out lately, I have had a whirlwind of that, like highs and lows, and the frequency, intensity, and duration, when you think about that, right? How often am I in that cycle of high-low? What's the frequency of that? What is the duration of it? It usually lasts about 5 weeks. And then how is that becoming more intense? So frequency, duration, and intensity, just for funsy, FDI, write that down. Notice that pattern, FDI, notice that in what is being signaled in the collective right now and where your attention is going, because nothing is resolving in the collective, if you've noticed. In fact, they're opening more and more and more loops that are intentionally not programmed to resolve. All of it is just for attention, extraction, industrial complex. That's what it's for. And that sets up the architecture of our realities right now, especially if we're chronically online. And many of us are. I mean, I can look around everywhere I go and everything is seemingly becoming more and more digital from I just moved to a different state. And so everything is online, everything is digital, everything is app-based. You have to unlock a door doing that. It's a, 4-step verification process using these 3 apps. In order to get your package, you have to use an app. Everything is becoming more and more digitalized, more and more synthetic and less organic. So the more that you can slow all of that down in your life, if you can, and return back to self, so we can reconcile our own internal polarity, the better off we're going to be. Okay, so with that, you guys, let's get into kind of what creates a pattern loop. So first, you have your trigger. We all know what that feels like, right? We get activated by something, our nervous system gets really, really tired, or it gets really, really tight, or we shut down. We have a physical somatic response. So that would be a trigger, or we get really upset by what someone has said to us. That trigger is accommodating a prediction, okay? It's accommodating something that is already existed in the past that has informed your nervous system to prepare for a certain type of outcome. So let's just fill this in. You get a text message from somebody, let's say it's an ex or someone that you're interested in dating, and they say something that kind of is like a red flag, because now you have all of the social media posts saved in your learning how to date archive, okay? Or you have all the relationship advice for your husband or kids, and you're reviewing all of it just so you have the language for it to try to ease the way your nervous system feels, okay? To try to help the fawn, flight, nervous system responses that we have. So you have a certain trigger, okay? So you've received a text message that is setting off an alarm system in your body. The prediction, which is the next thing, so the pattern loop is this: trigger, prediction, emotion, behavior, outcome, and then the prediction is confirmed. So the trigger is what just happened. The gun has gone off, okay? Mayday. The alarms are being set off. What just happened? You can feel that you're getting defensive. You can feel that you're behaving a certain way. Whether or not you have the awareness of that, you have the body experience of that. Your body is tight. The prediction says this, okay? That's the response. Your body has a certain way it's been conditioned to behave based on the conditions that you grew up in as a kid, what it learned behaviorally as you grew from infancy all the way to the age that you are now. Again, I've talked about this in a previous podcast, but just to repeat it here, you have about 3 hard codes from the inception till 5. Well, I'll say inception till 8, and then the age of 8 to 13, and then 13 to 25. That's about how long it takes for your brain to get a really good handle on who it thinks you're going to be. And then you've got the epigenetic backlog, which we know has been proven scientifically that we carry minimum 14 generations of our family ancestral lineage information. So all of our ancestors' information is in the cloud of us, in an aggregate of our combined family lineage in one big cloud, and we are the latest rendition of them. So we could be running exacerbated triggers from PTSD from 3 generations ago. So the way that happens is if you have anxiety running in your family for many, many, many years, the maternal line. My mother is very anxious. She has a hard time, not my mother, just an example. She's very anxious. She has a hard time handling, difficult conversations. She's an avoidant. She doesn't want to change. And her mother was the same way, and her mother was the same way. That's why she controls. So it's very triggering to be around somebody who controls a lot, especially from the maternal line, when you are working through personal empowerment patterns. So the prediction that your nervous system would run inside of that dynamic is that every time I'm around these types of people, my body locks up and I get really frustrated and I want to shut down and I want to fight. And we always argue, right? You're always trying to argue and take up and fight for your space because you don't feel seen, heard, or taken seriously. And like no grown person in their parental dynamic as a full-fledged adult wants to be managed, martyred, or controlled by their parents. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want that. Like, we want agency. We've worked a long time for that, but certain parents who have not worked through what they feel a paternal role is, if they haven't done any of that work for themselves, they are going to continue as a prediction to run off of all of these subconscious patterns of their nervous systems. I mean, it's just going to be inevitable. And you will do a lot of work. I've worked with many of you. I see the work you're doing. And the more, let's say, reconciled and coherent you become, the more the field is allowed to bend towards you. And these people can change in your presence, but it's not going to be easy in the beginning. Like, it took a long time for my family architecture to change. And I had to do a lot of that heavy lifting, like a lot of it. I was the one that had to kind of circle back. I was the one that had to learn how to recalibrate my nervous system around their expectations. I had to really accept and stop becoming the victim of a life that I actively participated in and created and take radical responsibility for my behavior in it. I had to stop running. I had to sit still and stop making a mess of everything. I got sober inside of all of that. I stayed sober inside of all of that. I studied. Like, it took quite a bit of work. So if you've made it that far and you're still in it, don't quit before the miracle. I'm telling you, it's possible, and it doesn't have to take as long as it took me. I'm just very stubborn. So if you have a trigger, your body has a prediction, and then your emotions are going to accommodate those predictions and those triggers. So very emotional people are emotionally stunted at a very specific age when they were first misattuned. So any misattunement from a very early age, childhood, let's say you have abandonment, you had neglect, you came from divorce, and the mom kicked into control, martyr, manager, dad was out of the picture, and then you took one of these strategies, either became the high achieving performer, or you kind of reverted into just creating a different character, which is the black sheep, which is kind of taking on all of the family's unprocessed stuff and then trying to convert all of them. I've talked about the black sheep before in an earlier podcast, but those with the high levels of light in the family usually take on the biggest burdens for the family line. It may seem unfair, but it's because we all wanted that level of challenge in order to transcend it, and also in order for us to fully have the access to that level of light and alchemical prowess. We took on everything that had been unresolved, not knowingly. If we came in this world, like if we came into this life to fully know what it's like to feel empowered, like I want to feel what it feels like to be fully loved for who I am without self-erasure, without self-edit, and what it feels like to have and know all of my power, right? And live from that awakened state without all of this contraction and heaviness. No one in the family line before that was up for the task. But there's something in you that knows that you're built for more, okay? And you can do great things. And there's a gap between where you are now and your potential. There's something in you that knows that. And that's why you're taking on and you're continuing to follow the curiosity. Chances are the people around you and your family have no interest in change. They want to stay kind of blind. They want to take the blue pill. They have their blinders on. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't have the strength. They're bypassers. They don't know how to stream multiple informations and bring it all the way down. And they're not interested in really sitting in the fire of who they are. They'll adapt. Some of them will adapt. Okay, they'll kind of adapt to their environment. They'll kind of be very great chameleons, and they'll be very likable, and they'll be really good survivors, and they'll even make some money doing all of that, but they're not embodied, and there's a difference. So your emotion accommodates the prediction is accommodating the trigger. So by the time you're into the behavior, you have already processed those 3 signals that came before. The behavior is accommodating the emotions, which is wrapped around the prediction, which is set off by the trigger. And then you have the outcome of that behavior. So if you are trying to move through, like, I don't understand why I talked to a gentleman the other day who couldn't understand why he was attracting a certain type of person online, right? These dating profiles, etc. And I was like, well, just give me an example of like an exchange you had with one of these potentials. And I said, that language is so unbelievably avoidant. I'm like, the pair of you are both dismissive avoidance. I can just tell by the exchange, just those 2 lines said right there. And I was like, what is accommodating? What is running in you? Okay, what is in you that is attracted to that type of person? That's the question. Not everyone around me is a problem, but what in me attracted this people, places, and things into my life? What is running in me that is accommodating that? That becomes the outcome. And then that prediction gets confirmed unless you fix or address or alchemize said prediction. Are y'all following me? I mean, for the most part, this is kind of speaks for itself, but if you're newer to the language or trying to really learn the language, a lot of what I teach is just updating the syntax of how we are articulating the way we're feeling in our lives. So the pattern loop again, which I have on I think page 34 of this workbook. And it's really self-explanatory. It's very pretty. It's going to give you a little bit of a preview of kind of the aesthetics and the branding of where SuperFreq is going in terms of kind of converting into more of like a learning institute, if you will, just as a preview. But you guys know, like every time I evolve and I up level and I expand and I'm being asked again to make these big stretches recently, everything changes and comes with me. And the signal clarifies, and that's part of the process. And I would want to see that if I was working with somebody, that I'm seeing their evolution in real time. So this loop is on page 34. It's the trigger, prediction, emotion, behavior, outcome, and then confirm prediction loop. So for practical application, okay, pick a behavior that you want to work on. If it's not just a pattern, because many of you have been with me long enough to know the slave framework. Okay, for those of you who are new, I built my entire SuperFreq architecture off of this framework that presented itself out of the first 1,000 sessions that I had one-to-one, individually having 15-minute sessions, people, for weeks and weeks and weeks and months when I started SuperFreq in 2023. And then this framework emerged. Just was a God thing. And sacrifice and control, right? How we abandon, diminish, or overextend ourselves to maintain connection, safety, belonging, or access. Okay, then you've got lack, which is how perceived scarcity organizes our choices, expectations, relationships, and capacity to receive. Addiction, how we attach to meaning, soothe symptoms, and manage chronic dysregulation. Essentially, this is where I see a lot of abuse patterns, self-abuse, compulsive soothing, substance or behavioral dependency, etc. And then you've got victim, how helplessness externalizes authority and how perceived lack of agency organizes behavior and reinforces existing patterns. That's all victim consciousness, and that is rife. And you'll see this a lot with men who are running the wounded boy. Okay, and I'll do a whole other podcast on that. And then, of course, you have epigenetics, how ancestral data, stress, behavior, and lived conditions influence genetic expression, and biological adaptations over time. So this is the slave framework that keeps us enslaved, okay, to these patterns and not sovereign within ourselves. So every reoccurring pattern is organized by a prediction. Every prediction is reinforced by meaning, and every meaning creates an identity. If you can identify what is organizing the pattern, you can begin changing it at the source. So the workbook that I've attached to this episode walks you through that process. So it's not enough just to have the insight. That will not work for behavioral change. I wish it did. I'm very sorry. But most of us try to change the behavior, but behavior is the final expression of something much deeper. Okay, we're looking at reverse engineering a confirmed prediction and then trying to access when it got initiated. Essentially, when did that install, this behavior install? When did that pattern become a strategy for protecting behavior that we're trying to work through? So the workbook that you're going to get is going to help you locate and investigate. You're going to find the pattern in the body and then trace its history. Then you're going to move into the story and the prediction. You're going to separate fact from story and then name what you're predicting, okay? Then 5 to 6 would be protection and identity. Find what the pattern protects and then separate from it. Remember, you are not the pattern, okay? You are the one observing the pattern and the behavior. Then you have response and evidence. You're going to practice and learn how to practice new ways to give your nervous system new proof. And I've talked about this before, but just remember this, that meeting yourself differently in the moment is not collapsing into contempt or old ways that you used to talk to yourself, behave, or old strategies that you used to employ. Now, it's just micro-dosing capacity. For example, if you're moving through these big capacity stretches, or you're finding your nervous system start to panic a little bit with something that didn't go right, and you're scanning the environment, you're looking for everything wrong, there's projection, you are inflamed. How can you meet yourself differently in that moment when you're inflamed? Usually there's a younger version of you that is kind of starting to panic, that wasn't met, that wasn't taught how to do hard things, that wasn't loved up in the process, that wasn't nurtured, and you're going to meet that version of you in that place. And so that is much of the work that we will do here. Again, the pattern diagnostic that is in the notes will be available to you, and it's available in all of my social channels. But this is about understanding what protection you're running to accommodate the pattern, the behavior, and then creating new evidence for that. So, all right, you guys, this was kind of a little mini episode to get you going and get you keeping into the pattern exploration process. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I'm happy to answer them. And if I don't see you in the Field Hub or the Pattern Lab, I will see you in the comments on social and in a couple weeks. Take care.